pretty sobering. I would encourage you to get a full copy. It's important. It's now my pleasure to introduce a great friend, a friend to all of us this week. I'm proud to say a friend of mine and somebody who's been a fantastic voice on education in America, Governor Tim Pawlenty.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you. Thanks a lot, and welcome to Minnesota. We're very grateful that you're here. I hope you're finding the Minnesota hospitality to your liking. But we're gathered here this morning to talk about, I think, one of the most important strategic issues and challenges and opportunities facing our country, and that is how we fix and improve our educational system for our kids and our grandkids, and for that matter, for the adults who need to be retrained as well. As a governor, of course, you hear these great stories as you travel around. I talked to a teacher the other day. She was telling me this story. A child didn't do his homework. He came into the classroom. She said, "Why didn't you do your homework?" He said, "Because I got into a big fight with a student who said you weren't the best teacher in the whole school." It's kind of like we're lying to each other about what's going on in education. And in a more modern and perhaps a more strategic way, Peter Drucker said it very well. Peter Drucker said that the things that got us here will not get us there. And as you think about our educational system in the United States of America, it is a system that has overall, on average, served us very well. We look at the results of our country and our economy. It's hard to argue at a macro level that it hasn't served us well. But the fact of the matter is this is a system that was designed a long time ago as a 1940s industrial, one-size-fits-all, quasi-assembly line where children come into school at kindergarten, move through the grades up to grades 12, we hope, and graduate at the other end. But the underlying premise is an egalitarian system. These kids are going to learn the same at about the same speeds, at about the same way, and we're going to move them along in this semi-assembly line fashion. We don't live in that world anymore. We live in the iPod world. We don't call into radio stations and wait for an hour for the semi-monopolistic provider of music to maybe take our call and grant our wish about what Frank Sinatra record we're going to play, like Newt used to ask when he would call in, or Tom Jones, or Frankie Valli, or the like. But now you go on to iPods, right? And you pick whatever you want, any song, any genre, any artist right now in surround sound in your ears or in your living room for 99 cents. That is the world we live in today. It's a metaphor for what we need to do to change, I believe, our educational system. But here are some specific thoughts from my perspective. I'm on the board of Achieve. I'm on the board of the Hunt Institute. I'm the chair of the Education Commission of the States. I'm chairing this Strategic Management of Human Capital Task Force with Alan Odden. I've gone to dozens, if not hundreds, of conferences about education reform and what we need to do. Here's a big first suggestion. We know what we need to do. We have hundreds of groups all across the country conference each other to death, and they're saying about the same thing. They're saying about the same thing. The problem is sufficiently diagnosed. Now we need to get on the solution side of the problem and quit admiring the problem to death. And there are great examples. There are great pilot projects. There are inspirational leaders who come to a site for a while and ignite it. There are interesting non-governmental organizations who are doing great things. But the fact of the matter is, the cold, hard reality is, nobody has brought fundamental change to scale in the United States of America anywhere. To scale. So let's get to it. I was at an Urban League dinner a couple of years ago on a different topic, and somebody stood up at the dinner in front of 1,200 people who run nonprofits, and they're wonderful people, and we love each and every one of them. And she said, "My first suggestion is quit starting new nonprofits, and let's get the ones we have to work." We have a cultural problem as it relates to education. In Minnesota, we brag tremendously about how we have the highest ACT scores in the nation, amongst the highest high school graduation rates in the country. We have the highest, or amongst the highest percent of people 25 and older who have a college degree, and many, many more. The list goes on and on and on, and we pat ourselves on the back. Boy, isn't that great? But those average statistics lie, and they lie for two fundamental reasons. They lie because we don't compete against the rest of the country anymore. We compete against the rest of the world. And as you know, countries are catching us and surpassing us educationally, and it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out where that leads in terms of a hyper-competitive global economy. Number two, we have statistics that lie because everybody in this room knows that the bottom third or the bottom half of our kids are doing awful. And they've been doing awful for 30 years. It doesn't matter whether President Reagan declared a crisis or President Clinton declared a crisis or President Bush declared a crisis. The fundamental statistics as it relates to children who are living in concentrated areas of disadvantage, there has a high correlation between that and their school results being awful. And the current system for them in most places is not working. Also on culture, you can't have let me just take a survey here. How many of you have gone to a sports camp or have a child or a loved one who you have sponsored or encouraged to go to basketball, hockey, football, some sports camp? Raise your hand if you've been there. Excellent. Just about everybody. How many of you have been to a science or math camp? Not too many. We have a culture that celebrates the wrong things. We have a culture that celebrates and pays great attention to, Britney Spears, Paris Hilton, sports. We have become an entertainment culture. When I was in high school, my mom died when I was in 10th grade. My dad was a truck driver and a dispatcher after that, and for a while he lost his job. I was really frightened about my future. I dove into school because I realized there was one pathway out. It was my education. And I would sometimes fall asleep at night doing my homework, and I'd unknowingly stumble back into my bed without my homework being done. So I ended up putting duct tape across the door of my bedroom, so if I was groggy and half asleep when I tried to get to my bed to sleep, I would hit the duct tape and wake back up and get back to my homework. We are not nearly intense enough, serious enough about calling it like we see it, which is our culture is in trouble as to how it relates to education, how we value education. The number one determining factor of how a child is going to do in school, non-school related, is their parents. Whether the parent is engaged, whether the parent or parent figure is involved. We hope you have two, but at least one that is engaged, involved, and on task, and putting up the guardrails and showing the way. Now, I haven't heard a lot of great suggestions about how to legislate good parenting. So we have to do what we can in that regard. But next, the number one school-related factor of how our children are going to do in school is the quality, preparedness, and effectiveness of their teachers. We love our teachers. They don't make too much money. They are not necessarily in it to get rich. They have a heart for learning. They have a heart for children. We thank them. We celebrate them. We love them. But they're working in a system that's 50 years out of date. And the quality of our teachers has eroded to the point where we all should be quite concerned about it. And the factors that go into it are these. Our colleges of education in the United States of America are not nearly sufficiently rigorous and relevant to the subject matter mastery that our teachers have to have. Number two, we are not attracting the quality people that we need into teaching for a variety of reasons. Once they arrive into teaching as new teachers, we are not sufficiently developing and training and supporting them, particularly in the first 5 years. We have a system that has coming shortages in key areas such as science and technology and math, and yet we don't have the flexibility or the attractiveness in the profession to garner more people into those professions. We also have a school system overall that is structured not to reward that. So what do we do about that? Governors, legislators, and others need to demand from our universities that if you're going to be accredited and you're going to get money to turn out teachers, the ones you turn out have to be good. And some are currently, some are not. They're not prepared. Number two, when they arrive, we need to have a system where a teacher doesn't have to go into their principal or their supervisor and say, I'm in trouble, I'm deficient, please report to the principal. We need master and mentor teachers and outside support so that those first 5 years are not as difficult as they currently are. Next, we need to have professional development that is rigorous and relevant. In Minnesota, even, as good as we think we are, we waste a lot of money on irrelevant, non-rigorous, tangential staff development. We should pay for staff development that is rigorous and relevant and aligned to the needs and the realities of the classroom. We also need to move to a system where we pay for performance. We have done this in Minnesota. It is controversial. If you're not in government, how many of you get paid just for seniority? Anybody? The world has moved on. 85% of all the money that goes into schools goes into what? Salaries and benefits, an operating budget. And do you know what it's aligned to? Seniority. Do you know what the correlation is between seniority and the effectiveness of the teacher in student learning? Almost zero, right? So if you're in an enterprise today in the world, you have to define your core mission with precision, be able to articulate what it is, and then have the money aligned to the outcomes that you desire. What is the core mission of schools? It isn't whether we all feel good about it. It's whether students are learning, what they're learning, how fast they're learning. We need to have some part of the increased funding for schools, as much as possible, in my view, aligned to whether that strategic objective is actually being met in measurable and accountable ways. And the teacher unions, as you know, are our friends, but they don't come along as the quickest group on reform items. In a place like Minnesota, we're not going to be able to leapfrog them very easily. We'd like to find a way to work with them, because in the political environment that we're in here, things aren't going to get done unless the teacher unions green-light it. They're a very powerful group. And it's not a bad thing to say we'd like to have as our partners in the discussion and the result people who do this day in and day out actually know what they're talking about. And then lastly, I want to just talk about these issues regarding the most challenged sites and the upcoming shortages by topic area. If you have a shortage in a business of a particular talent, what might you do to fulfill the need? You might pay more, right? If we have the gym teacher and the high school physics teacher making the same, and we have a surplus of gym teachers and a shortage of physics teachers, particularly in challenged sites, does it not make sense to pay the physics teachers more? Why do we have to have a system where everybody's the same regardless of demand, regardless of need, regardless of skill, regardless of outcome? It doesn't make sense. I'll also tell you, while we love Teach for America and related groups, we shouldn't have to have an outside group killing themselves, trying to go out and get talented people, and then begging public school systems to take a few Teach for America folks. The public school district should have that tone and tempo and desire and passion themselves to go out and do that. So we have a lot of work to do, but there's not a lot of mystery in this. I would suggest to you, between all of the great literature, all of the great writing, all of the great conferences, all of the great speakers, the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of education groups could come together and agree on at least 3 or 5 basic things that would help us greatly as it relates to education reform in the country, and then get everybody rowing in the same direction. We know what needs to be done. We can't easily change parenting, and we can't overnight change the culture. We can lend voice to it and should fight like the Dickens for it. But in terms of public policy, congressional action, legislative action, school board action, there are a series of practical, tangible things, including the ones I've just outlined, that we need to move forward towards. I will close with a little story about Michael Jordan, who is, I think, perhaps the greatest basketball player that ever played the game. He was in Cleveland, although I gave this speech in Cleveland the other night. They didn't appreciate it because actually he's playing against the Cleveland Cavaliers in Chicago. But he scored 56 points by himself in one game, and the coach gave him a break towards the end with just a minute to go to walk off the court so the hometown crowd could give him a deserved ovation, and they did. And with just a minute left to go in the game, this rookie goes in the game, had never played before. He gets the ball, and with just seconds left, he tries to shoot, but he gets fouled. He goes to the free throw line, and he gets 2 attempts. He makes one, he misses one, so he gets 1 point. Buzzer ends, the game goes off into the locker room, and the game's over, and the press kind of hovers around Michael Jordan and his spectacular 56-point performance. This one enterprising reporter kind of drifts off over to the rookie. Says, this is your first NBA experience. You know, what does it mean to you? What should we take from it? The rookie looked up and said, tonight should be forever remembered as the night that Michael Jordan and I together scored 57 points. We can't do this as isolated silos. You can't do it with just the teacher unions. We can't do it with the study groups and the think tanks. We can't just do it as government officials. We can't do it with just passionate citizens. We have to come together and be a team, whether you're Michael Jordan or the rookie. And I do not believe that we are so far apart, at least as to the basic needs and concepts, that we couldn't put together a powerful coalition, potentially including our friends in the teacher unions, and move forward as a country. It is going too slow. We will all be dead. Everyone in this room will be dead if we continue on the current pace of reform before we see a significant change in educational outcomes to scale in this country. And I'm not that old yet. We can't wait another 30 years. The pace is too slow. So I look forward to helping with this. I think the technology I didn't mention can be a huge part of it, but if you want to see some interesting examples of technology, they're eye-popping, they are jaw-dropping, they can drive quality, drive down costs, drive economies of scale in key ways. It doesn't replace traditional learning in classroom, but it can be a great supplement. I wish you a great rest of the conference. Unfortunately, I have to go back over to St. Paul for some other matters, but I'm delighted that you're here, and thank you to this distinguished panel for carrying on the discussion. Thanks a lot.